The evening sun spilled golden light across the small town, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. The gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming roses, and the distant sound of church bells echoed through the quiet streets. On the porch of an old wooden house sat John and Margaret, their hands intertwined as if they had never let go since the day they first found each other. John looked at her, his eyes still filled with the same wonder he had felt more than 50 years ago, and whispered, "You're still my girl, Margaret, my first love, my last love, my forever." She smiled, her wrinkled face glowing with the softness of a woman who had been deeply loved all her life, and replied, "And you are still the boy who picked up my book that day and captured my heart." Their story did not begin in luxury or grandeur. It began with a simple moment, almost too ordinary to notice, yet powerful enough to change two lives forever. Decades earlier, John had been just a shy 18-year-old helping his father in the family's hardware store. His life was plain and predictable until one afternoon a girl walked past carrying a stack of books. Her hair, tied neatly with a ribbon, danced in the wind, and her smile made the dusty little street feel alive. That girl was Margaret. John froze, unable to look away. Something inside him whispered that his life had just changed, though he couldn't explain why. For weeks he waited by the shop window, watching her pass. Sometimes she was alone, sometimes with friends, but always with books in her arms and kindness in her eyes. He rehearsed words in his head, yet every time she appeared, his courage failed him. Then fate offered him a chance. One of her books slipped from her hand, landing on the pavement. John rushed forward, his heart pounding, picked it up, and nervously said, "You dropped this." Margaret looked at him, her brown eyes warm and sparkling, and smiled. "Thank you." She replied, "I'm Margaret." That brief exchange was enough to set a fire in John's heart. From then on, they began to talk. At first, their conversations were shy, filled with small details, her dream of becoming a teacher, his hope of owning a shop one day. But soon their words grew deeper, flowing with laughter, secrets, and promises. They met by the park bench in the town square, where John would bring her wildflowers and Margaret would share pieces of her favorite books. Every evening felt like magic, as though the world around them faded and only their hearts existed. One evening, under the fading glow of sunset, John finally confessed what he had been carrying in his heart. "Margaret," he said softly, "I don't know how to say this, but I think I've loved you from the moment I first saw you." She blushed, her cheeks glowing like rose petals, and whispered, "And I think I've been waiting for you all along." That night, as they walked home hand in hand, their hearts sealed a promise that time itself could not break. Their wedding came 2 years later. It wasn't grand, no chandeliers or champagne fountains, just a small church filled with family and friends. Margaret wore a simple white dress her mother had sewn by hand, and John wore a suit borrowed from his cousin. Yet when they exchanged vows, looking into each other's eyes with tears glistening, they felt like the richest people in the world. John slipped a ring onto her finger and whispered, "Forever, Margaret, I promise you forever." The early years of marriage were hard. They lived in a tiny rented house with creaky floors and thin walls. Money was scarce, and some nights they went to bed hungry, choosing to feed their children first, but they never complained. Margaret often said, "We may not have much, John, but as long as we have love, we have everything." And John, weary from long days at the hardware shop, would kiss her forehead and reply, "I'll work harder tomorrow for us." Their love was their wealth, and it was enough. When children came, a son first, then a daughter, their lives grew busier and fuller. Parenthood brought sleepless nights and endless responsibilities, but also immeasurable joy. They weren't rich, but they gave their children something far greater, a home filled with warmth, laughter, and unconditional love. John would sneak into the children's room after long days, watching them sleep, then turn to Margaret and say, "We may not give them riches, but we're giving them something better. We're giving them us." Margaret, with tired eyes but a glowing smile, always replied, "And that's more than enough." Even in the busiest years, John never forgot romance. Every anniversary, no matter how tight money was, he brought Margaret a single red rose. She laughed at his stubborn tradition, but pressed each flower between the pages of a scrapbook. Over time, the scrapbook became a diary of their love, filled with dried roses and handwritten notes that told the story of their journey together. But life has a way of testing love. In their late 40s, Margaret began feeling weak. She dismissed it as fatigue, but John insisted on seeing a doctor. The diagnosis struck like thunder: cancer. John felt the ground slip beneath him, but Margaret, ever brave, held his hand and whispered, "Don't cry, John. We'll face this together." The months that followed were brutal. Chemotherapy stole Margaret's strength, and there were nights she cried from the pain. Yet John never left her side. He learned to cook her favorite soups, read aloud from her favorite novels, and held her hand during every hospital visit. Sometimes, when Margaret was too weak to speak, John would lean close and whisper, "You promised me forever, Margaret. I'm not letting you go yet." Against all odds, Margaret recovered. Slowly her strength returned, her laughter came back, and the light in her eyes shone once more. The doctors called it a miracle. John called it love, the kind of love that refuses to surrender. As the years passed, their children grew, married, and started families of their own. John and Margaret became grandparents, their hearts swelling with pride each time a grandchild climbed onto their laps. Their once busy house, now quieter, filled again with laughter whenever their family visited. In the evenings, John and Margaret sat on the porch, watching sunsets, reflecting on the life they had built. Margaret often said, "We've had a beautiful life, haven't we?" And John would squeeze her hand and reply, "The most beautiful one." Even in their 70s, their love remained fresh and alive. Neighbors admired them as they strolled hand in hand through the park. They still danced slowly in the living room to the same old records, laughing when John stepped on her toes. They still teased each other playfully, still kissed as though they were young lovers. One evening, as the golden sun dipped below the horizon, Margaret leaned her head on John's shoulder and asked softly, "Do you remember the first time you saw me?" John smiled, his eyes misty with memory. "How could I forget? You were carrying books, and I thought you were the most beautiful girl in the world." Margaret laughed gently. "And after all these years, do you still think that?" John took her hand, kissed it tenderly, and whispered, "You're not just the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. You're the woman who gave me a lifetime of love." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes as she kissed his cheek. Their hearts, though older, still beat with the same rhythm they had shared for decades. Their love had not only survived but flourished, becoming stronger with every storm they had faced together. And so their story lives on, not in novels or movies, but in the small, quiet moments of everyday life. The morning coffee they shared, the arguments that always ended with forgiveness, the simple act of holding hands while walking home. True love, they proved, is not about riches or fame. It is about choosing each other every day for a lifetime, because love doesn't grow old, only people do. And for John and Margaret, love was the one thing that never aged, the one treasure they carried from their first hello to their last breath.